still joining, but
what about, is Mary here?
we have Mary here, and
Okay.
yes, we have Bob
Okay,
Mann from NAL.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order the continuation of the public hearing on the Healthy Lawns Act. And I want to thank everyone for their time availability today, particularly our participants, presenters from last week. And we're joined today. We're blessed to be joined today by Councilmember Tom Hucker, who is okay.
He should be here very momentarily. I'm Ruthie Goldberg, his legislative aide.
Hi, Ruth. Okay, well, we'll wait. We'll wait until we... Quiet. Okay. Well, in any case, for those that are on, this is a continuation of the hearing, and I asked Councilmember Hucker to join us today so he could explain the history of the law and his advocacy of it and where it stands in terms of the implementation in the county. But what we're going to do, the way we're going to proceed is that we were in the middle of going around the council to get questions. So I promised that we would start with Councilmember Panner, and then we will go to Councilmember Circo. Then we will go back to the president and the other two, since we have a new presenter on. And then after that, we will open it up to questions from our residents and guests. And we have a new, more efficient procedure, I hope, which Matt will talk about in a minute. And so why don't I now turn it over to Matt so he can reintroduce the other presenters and talk about how we're going to take questions from our residents and guests.
Hi, so thank you everybody for being here. We may still get some people that pop on. So just as a reminder, last week we were joined by Bob Mann and Andrew Bray from the National Association of Landscape Professionals, and Mary Travaglini from the Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection to give us some background on the Anti-Pesticide law in the county, also known as the Healthy Lawns Act. And this week we are just continuing that discussion, an opportunity for our council to ask questions about the logistics of the law. We're also joined by Councilmember Tom Hucker, who's going to give some legislative background on it. Thank you, Councilman, for taking the time to join us today. And then after our council is finished, I'm going to open it up to residents if residents have questions. I have everybody on mute right now. Everybody does have the ability to mute or unmute themselves, but what I'm going to ask, just to keep it moving in an orderly fashion, is to use the raise hand function for residents if you do have a question, and then I can call on you and unmute you, just so that you have the floor to yourselves and are able to clearly ask your question. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if you have anything else to say.
Well, the other thing I want to say is that at the request of the council, our town attorney is also present, isn't that right?
And just, sorry, and one other reminder that we are recording our council meetings, and so we will post that for you to go back and look at if you want at any point.
And the town attorneys, is the town attorney here?
I am.
Oh, thank you. Oh, look, we get to see you this time. Great. So at this point is Ruth, is Tom?
He's here.
Oh, he's there. Okay.
He's here, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I want to thank Councilmember Hucker for his willingness to participate in this public hearing. For those of you who don't know him, he is a very distinguished District 5 council member. He's a former member of the General Assembly representing the Silver Spring area, and he's also the former executive director of Progressive Maryland. And we asked him to come here today to sort of explain the history of this law and his role and what his continuing advocacy of the law is. So with that, Councilmember Hucker, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll for that ridiculously generous introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. I'm glad you're looking at this issue. Certainly, we would like to do anything that we can. I know, my colleagues and I and the county staff to make sure you get your questions answered and can make a decision based on all the most current information. I'll try to be brief and then, see what questions people might have at the end. And I do want to thank Mary Travaglini from DP, who has been, I think is with us today. I think has been with you last week and has been doing a great job implementing this law since the courts have upheld it and said that we need to start enforcing it. So as you're aware, it was Bill 5214 that passed. The 14 is obviously 2014 through the county council. It bans the use of synthetic pesticides on lawns, playgrounds, mulched recreation areas, and private childcare facilities. And the mayor asked me to share just a little bit of the history from my perspective. I haven't had the time, unfortunately, to research a lot of what happened before I joined the council, and I haven't had the opportunity to get back in our building since we're all telecommuting to read the testimony and the bill file like I had hoped to do. But if you have questions I can't answer today, I'm happy to try to get you more information. My experience with the law began when I started with the county council. I was elected in 2014 and began at the very beginning of 2015. And at that time, the law was already in place in the city of Tacoma Park, which is in my district, and I used to represent them in the General Assembly as well. So it had been sponsored, I believe, by Council Member Seth Grimes, who many of you probably know, and it passed through the city and was relatively popular there. So at the time, the organization that had done the most to advance it, Safe Grow Montgomery, their leaders, some of whom lived in Tacoma, but some of them lived elsewhere in the county, approached Tacoma Park resident county council member George Leventhal and asked if he would be willing to put in county legislation. So he did, he agreed to, and he wanted to introduce it and propose it during 2015, which was the year that George served as the council president. So he had a little more control over the council schedule. I was new to the council at the time, but I had been designated as the lead member for the environment. So Councilmember Berliner, who chaired the Transportation Environment Committee that I now chair, he had me run the hearings. And we had two public hearings, two evening hearings where the 300-person county council chamber in Rockville was filled to standing room only capacity. We heard testimony from dozens of advocates and opponents. You could imagine who was on each of the sides. We heard a lot of advocacy, not just from Safe Grow Montgomery and environmental groups, but in particular public health groups, from many just individual residents who had been concerned about the exposure to pesticides for years, but particularly the exposure to their young children whose brains are still developing, the exposure of their pets who often don't listen to our commands and run onto somebody's lawn, even if you're not using pesticides on your lawn. It can be hard to keep your pets sometimes off other lawns or off, there's concern about their exposure in the parks. And we heard a lot of testimony from people with compromised immune systems because of various medical conditions that they had. So all that resulted in a lot of compelling testimony, but certainly, relatively disruptive bill compared to many of the more minor pieces of legislation we considered. So the bill took quite a long time to pass and finally passed, 6-3 and it was enacted without the executive signature back in October of 2015, about a year after it was introduced, which is really unusual. And then following the enactment, the lawsuit was filed by Complete Lawn Care and other lawn care companies contending that the county could not impose the law because we were really preempted by state law. Generally, pesticides, as you all know, are generally regulated under state law. Question was whether we had the authority to do this more targeted law in our capacity as the Board of Health. The bill was upheld after a long delay by the Court of Special Appeals last May, you remember, in 2019, and then in July, the Maryland Court of Appeals denied a petition to hear the case, so now the law stands. And that's why Mary's been able to begin her great work educating stakeholders about it and beginning to enforce the law. There's a modest violation of the law, a $50 fine, but we're really not enforcing that. To my knowledge, at this point, we're just focusing on educating residents about the existence of the new law and about the safe alternatives that are on the market. Again, let me, I promise you to be brief. I've kind of broken my promise, so let me stop there and turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. So we will now turn to Councilor Panner for questions. Remember, it's questions for Tom or the other presenters. So you can unmute, Matt, you can unmute Morris. Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. I did have a couple of questions. I read what has been presented, which was helpful. I'm curious, we're still allowed to use anything we want that's permitted by state law on gardens. Is that correct?
I don't think it's true that you can use any, pardon me, anything permitted by state law, but I'd have to check. I know in particular, I think the most common thing you're going to be you're probably referring to is there's an exemption for treating invasive species, as well as treating trees, and there was a big wide exception for farm communities. But yeah, for invasive species, and those are defined by the state, you can treat them with anything allowed in the state of Maryland.
Got it. So would we be able to?
I can clarify a little bit. I'm not sure, Mr. Panner, what exactly your question is, but because the law applies to lawns, playgrounds, private childcare facility grounds, and mulch recreation areas, it does not apply to garden beds. So it doesn't apply to vegetable gardens. It doesn't apply to things like flower beds or mulched garden beds like that, where people are not invited to recreate. And it doesn't apply to sidewalk cracks, patio cracks, things of that nature.
Got it. And it also, I take it, wouldn't apply to being around the house. So for example, one of the problems we have in this community is water pools, and then we get mosquitoes around houses that have pillars and patios, and so that wouldn't be, this is really just for the broad expanse of the lawn itself, right?
Right. So it does not apply to biting or stinging insects, and it doesn't apply to indoor pests if their treatments are around the foundations of the home.
Got it. So mosquito treatment wouldn't be affected by this.
That's correct.
I see. And then that's very helpful. And then
and it could still be treated to the lawn. This is Andrew Bray with the National Association of Landscape Professionals. Pesticides, synthetic pesticides, could still be used on lawns for ticks or other stinging insects. To be very clear on that point.
Yes.
Got it. That's very helpful. And then the other question I had was, one thing I was curious about is whether it's possible for us to adopt this so that there's no enforcement brought against individual citizens, but that, the county enforcement efforts would be focused on, any type of company, so they could ensure compliance. But I'm curious whether we can opt ourselves out of compliance against individual residents.
I think that's probably going to be a more complicated question between the town's attorney and the county attorney for them to have a discussion about how adaptations can be adopted. I'm not sure if that would require adoption with a certain exemption, or whether it would be the town adopting their own code that basically has all of the county's code except for X, Y, or Z. So I think that's probably a legal question that have to be discussed separately.
Thank you. That's why we have our town attorney here. So, Mr. Town Attorney, can you respond to that?
Yeah, I agree with that response. And generally, I think it would be accomplished in that manner. The town would adopt by reference in its code the county provisions that it wants enforced, but then the county would have to agree to enforce a limited law. And that would be done by MOU,
Got it. Okay.
Memorandum of Understanding.
Got it. And then my third question, maybe this is for all of the participants, but maybe in a follow-up to this, it would be interesting if there's like a little chart available that would indicate where we could use what. So sounds like on garden beds, trees, patios, areas around houses, we can use whatever. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but some version of something like whatever we want to use that's been approved by the state. Then anywhere we're able to use things to prevent, ticks and mosquitoes and stuff like that. So I guess I'm a little bit confused about what would be, what are we really going after for the residential part of, for residents. I understand we've adopted it for our town and the broad expanse of our areas, but I'm curious what would be the implication for the residents. So if I could ask maybe for that follow-up rather than doing it now with everybody on, and that would be helpful to me. So that concludes my questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
And we're happy to follow up with that. That information is under our website under exemptions. So it is there. If it's not in a format that's clear, we're happy to help with that.
I looked at that and I couldn't put it, I'm not an expert on these matters, and I couldn't figure out what that would mean for my own, like I couldn't figure out how I would live my life differently as just a regular resident based on that chart. So it would just be helpful follow-up.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Circo, do you have questions?
Perfect timing. Thank you very much. I think we all received this, folks who see it, this mailer a while ago that from the county on the Healthy Lawns Act, which covers it. It explains that, for example, weed and feed products contain both a fertilizer and a pesticide and are not allowed for use under county law on lawns. So you cannot just use combination fertilizer and pesticides. And this mailer provides some more information. I won't go through all of it, but I think the information is there. I was just curious. I hadn't realized that Tacoma Park sort of led this effort. So I'd be curious to hear if there's some experiences on how Tacoma Park adopted to just using organic lawn care.
I think that would be for Councilor Hucker.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. I'm not sure how much, I'm not that familiar with their enforcement. I'm not even sure that much time passed between their passage of the law and the consideration by the Montgomery County Council. So I'm happy to, I mean, it's a good question, and I'm happy to get back to you, but I really don't have a lot of information on their enforcement of the law. And then, go ahead.
Also, Councilmember Circo, we can bring in the mayor of Tacoma Park, or we'll figure that out. We'll
Great.
And talk about that.
Yeah, I can give a brief background. I believe that Tacoma Park's law precedes ours by several years, and their law is actually different in how it's written. So the way that Tacoma Park's law works is they actually have a list of banned pesticides for use on lawns. Ours is not a list of banned pesticides. It is categories of pesticides that you can use. And it focuses differently. It's a little more broad reaching. And also ours is part of an overall pesticide law that also deals with not just the use, but also the storage and the retail operations. So we through our health department, also enforce under the pesticide code the storage and spillage within retail operations within the county. So ours is a much broader law, and ours actually does apply in Tacoma Park as well. And the way Tacoma Parks works right now is they average about 10 to 12 complaints a year, and typically 1 to 3 of those are found to be actual violations, according to their police officer who enforces this.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Circa, do you have further questions?
Just one follow-up. Mary was talking about education and enforcement and how my understanding is the focus of DEP would be on education. I just wondered if she could provide a little bit more information on how DEP would provide that education.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Right now, what we're doing is that if we have a violation reported, depending on the amount of information we have, we often don't know whether it was actual a violation. So what we're doing right now is we're sending letters to contact the property owner if they are the one that is believed to do the violation, or the company that's in question. We're making sure that in that letter they are aware that we had a report, that we don't know whether what they used was in violation or not. We include pictures or evidence if we do have more evidence, and we let them know about the law. We ask them to comply with the law and to contact us if they have any questions. That is our first step right now, and we have so far, for every company that we've been in touch with, they've been very responsive about letting us know that they are indeed being compliant, or if they were doing something under an exemption. So right now, that's the extent of it, is to start with a letter and contact with the purported violator. And we'll wait until we, we'll deal with the next steps when we see whether or not we have a violation that comes in that is an actual violation, that then that person or that company repeats the violation. We'll take it one step at a time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Council President Shaw, do you have questions?
Just one, because I know there are some legal questions people would like answered. I was wondering whether, even on an anecdotal basis, you have a sense within Montgomery County of the national or regional landscape firms that work within Montgomery County, whether their ability to comply with the law has been different from the really small companies.
I'm happy to share a little bit I know, and Mary is probably more the expert, but I know my staff and I have met with a few of the local firms who mostly, well, at the time there were, at the time of the debate around the law, there were several local firms that don't use pesticides at all who advocated for the law. And, you might think, well, they will now get lots more competition and they maybe, have that market all to themselves, prior to the passage of the law. But I was glad that they testified for the law, and they were happy to provide, technical assistance to anybody, any of their competitors who were hoping to transition. Since the decision by the court, we've met with several companies who sought us out because they were looking for an extension to the law. And I think there were some concerns, legal and otherwise, with doing that. They really hadn't used the time when the law was held in abeyance by the court to prepare for the enactment of the law. And, I think now they're figuring out how to transition. But other than that's been my very limited experience, but I know Mary's been meeting with many of these companies.
Yeah, and I can say that I have not yet had any company approach us that they've been unable to provide alternative services. But of course, that's not necessarily something we would be interacting or hearing about as much. It's possible that Andrew or Bob can speak to whether or not any of their members have spoken about pulling out of the county from work perspective.
Yeah, and this is Andrew from National Association of Landscape Professionals again. From the large company perspective, they've been offering, the alternative non-synthetic pesticides. The smaller companies probably have been offering a little less of that. The issue is they've been offering it, and the customers generally don't want it. It hasn't produced the same results. There's no efficacy required for any of the products that that ordinance, it passed, says that you can use. But as I mentioned on the last call, one of the first things somebody may decide to cut if they're, in tough economic times and some of the uncertainty right now, maybe their lawn care service or a business that hasn't been open for the last several months. So from our perspective, we do think that there will certainly be an adverse economic impact. I think if the county can continue to use the product, I don't understand why residents or a business could. So I would just offer that anecdotally, and I'm sure I could provide more information if given time.
And Andrew, just a correction, because this came up last week, the county cannot use the products. We are not exempt from the law.
And the town of Somerset does not use the
Hold on. It's still Council President Charles' turn. Marty, do you have any?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Council Member Zuighauser.
I have one clarification that I'm hoping is correct, because it would just make it so much easier. Council Member Circo referred to this as organic care. Mary, is that the correct terminology? Because if it is, I think for people it would be so much easier to understand that. And I'm more interested in the educational side of this.
Sure. So there are national organic land care standards that don't just apply to pesticides. They apply to a lot of different activities within landscape standards. It is not the same term, it's not the same laws that organic agriculture has. So there are national standards for that. So we are using the term organic lawn care, but understanding that organic can mean different things depending what box you might put them in.
So if you were trying to describe it, because again, I'm worried more about the small businesses. I think there are many small business lawn care givers in town. We couldn't say, a homeowner could not say, we want organic care. We would have to go into more detail. Is that correct or not?
So if they're just talking about the pesticide use, they would reference organic, because the pesticide law references the USDA organic list of products that are allowed to be used. If it's beyond that, if they're talking organic standards for everything else in their landscape, there are additional steps, but a lot of people use it in reference to the use of pesticides.
So if you wanted, I'm just trying to simplify this for an education, as an educational tool. If a homeowner just wanted to ask their lawn care giver a question, or to say, do you provide this service, so that they would be compliant with this law, what would that question be?
I think the question would be, are you compliant with Montgomery County's pesticide law?
Right.
Okay, but that then gets more complicated for the two people in a truck who might not understand everything. And I guess then I go back to how do we, these very small businesses then, that maybe have evolved over the last few years, how are we going to educate them so that they can function within this new, should we adopt it within the policy?
So I could say that it doesn't matter whether it's one person at the truck, two people with the truck, right, or somebody with a franchise. If they are applying pesticides to someone else's property, they have to have a state license. So their education on that level should already be very high, and they should be able to be compliant with that. We do have a whole host of other laws that can apply to any business, large or small, including our leaf blowers in terms of our noise ordinance. So there's a lot, and illegal dumping. There's all sorts of things that all these businesses have challenges, in terms of needing to remain educated, and we definitely will do whatever we can to help them. But again, if they're applying pesticides, they should be educated at a high level to have already had their pesticide licensing through the state, and being able to understand the county law should not be difficult.
And is it your understanding that most of these small companies do have licenses?
I cannot speak to that. They're supposed to. If
I
they're
I
applying
realize that.
pesticides and they don't, that's an issue.
Okay, and how would you know if they had a license or not?
Their trucks are actually supposed to be labeled with their state pesticide license on it. So if they do not have that on it, then they would need to be reporting as to why, oh, my truck broke down and this day I had to use X, Y, or Z. But they're also supposed to be carrying their license paperwork with them.
So that if there was a truck in town that did not have the appropriate ID, what would a resident do?
So what happens on our end, I can tell you, is and we've had this happen, if somebody reports a violation, that license number can be looked up. We can figure out who the license is associated with, and through all of our means that we have to contact people just with any violation, we would be able to look them up. We can look up their pesticide license, their name in the state registration database. If again, it may be that they borrowed their friend's truck or something like that, but through contact with them, we'll get through to figure out whether or not that person was a licensed applicator. But oftentimes, if we can't find evidence that they were licensed, we're going to pass that off to the state to enforce.
Okay, because I'm a little worried about enforcement because our town staff is so small. We have 2 people in the office, and I would not want this for the burden to fall upon our town office. I wouldn't want residents calling the town and then the town having to report it to you. So you're saying that residents would contact you directly?
We ask residents to call 311 with any violation of any county code.
Okay, so the town staff would not have to be involved in that?
No.
Okay, terrific. Okay, no, thank you so much. No more questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Peel.
Thank you. Hi, Matt. My questions have more to do with enforcement and what the path would be. And I don't know whether Ron can help me understand that, or maybe Mary, in your experience seeing how this plays out for other municipalities. I guess I'm trying to avoid a fact pattern where a resident calls our town staff, as Barbara mentioned, and reports what they think might be a violation. I think that's going to happen anyway, even if people are told they're supposed to call 311. I think reality is that people will call our town staff. So I guess one of my first questions for Ron would be, if somebody calls our town office, does that put us under an obligation to follow through on enforcement in any way? Because if we've adopted the law and if the county sort of declines to enforce it in terms of fining, I just want to know what the outside edge is for our exposure. Are we going to then be asked to impose a fine because the county wouldn't? I mean, if a resident were motivated enough to push this all the way through and maybe felt that this had been an ongoing problem or something like that, and really wanted to see a monetary punishment, I guess my question sort of is, where does that put the town? Where does that put the administrators in the town office? Where does that put the town council in terms of a fact-finding situation in a circumstance where it's probably pretty difficult to find facts? And it also potentially pits neighbors against neighbors. So I guess maybe between Ron and Mary, if you could sort of explain what our obligation would be, but also maybe give some anecdotal information about how other municipalities, especially the small ones, have been able to manage this without putting a burden on the small towns.
Sure. So this is Ron. I'll start with the obligations. And with respect to practical enforcement, I'll defer. With respect to what obligations the town would have, it would depend on what you do with the law, whether you adopt it as your own, or whether, I think what's really being contemplated is whether you allow the county law to be enforced in the town. You have basically those two options. You could adopt the law as your own so that you would have the right to enforce it, or a similar law. If you did adopt the law as your own with an ordinance, then you would have the obligation to enforce it. On the other hand, if you simply allowed the county law to apply in the town would have no obligation to enforce the county law. And
Okay.
if staff received a call, the town could decide whether, as a matter of practice, the response would be for the town staff person to inform the complaining resident to call the county, or to perhaps call the county on the resident's behalf. But there would be no legal obligation on the town to enforce the county law. You see, under
And
state law,
no evidence gathering at that point from the town.
I'm sorry, say again?
That the town manager and would not be required to sort of go out to the site and take a look for himself and sort of gather evidence at that time.
No.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that. Okay.
And
I'm
so,
sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, just real quickly, you probably know that under state law, municipalities have the option by ordinance to decide what county laws apply in their jurisdiction, with some limited exemptions. The towns can exempt themselves from tax laws, zoning laws, and certain public health and safety laws that are adopted by the county pursuant to a specific procedure. But with respect to this pesticide law, the town can decide whether the county law should or should not apply in the town. And we have in the town code currently a list of what county laws apply and which do not apply. So I think the question is, are we going to amend that list to allow the county pesticide law to apply in the town? And then thereafter, it would be the county's responsibility to enforce it.
Okay. So Mary, I guess my question then, just to know what other small municipalities have experienced with this, have you seen situations come up where somebody will report something that they believe to be a violation, and that the county sends out your informational letter, and that there's any sort of next level of follow-up from that reporting person looking for a more intense level of enforcement?
We have not yet had that, mostly because most of the folks that do report a violation, I'm able to connect with on the phone first before I send out a letter, because we want to gather as much information as possible. We also want, some people are concerned about confidentiality, so we want to be able to discuss with them and ensure it, because some people say, I want this to be confidential. I'm a little bit weirded out because it's the neighbor and I don't want to be that person, et cetera. So we usually talk to the person who's reporting this first. At some of the companies we are already familiar with. So I've had complaints where somebody said, I saw a little yellow sign and the company name is on there, and I don't even have to send a letter because I've already sent a letter. I've already had contact with that company, et cetera. We have yet, it's relatively early on, so I can't say, but we've yet to have any contact from an independent municipality where their manager or council member or somebody says, I got the complaint and it's passed on. Usually most people bring that complaint straight to us.
Okay. So I just so I'm sure I understand, the reports that you're getting in your office by 311 are coming in from essentially neighbors reporting that they believe there's been a violation by one of their neighbors. I'm not going to the quality of that. I just want to make sure I understand that that's what's happening.
We've had several varieties of complaints. We've had landscapers complaining against other identifiable landscapers. We've had landscapers complaining about unidentifiable landscapers, just two people with a truck or an unmarked truck. We've had individuals who are, it's their adjacent neighbor. We've had individuals who have just been walking down the street by themselves or with their dog or with their family and reported a sign or something they saw. So we've already had the gamut of every different type of report you could get.
So, but when people are working on lawns, they may be in fact carrying out some permitted activity, right?
Yes, they absolutely may be, and
so
we
it becomes
we
very
want
difficult
to assume that.
Yeah.
We want to assume that they're doing the right thing, and that's why I can give you an example of letters if you'd like me to send an example of one that was recently sent out. I can send that to distribute to the council, but it's usually that we address it in a way that we don't know what you used. We hope you were compliant. And here, if in case you weren't, here's the information about the law. Please contact me or go to our website, gather more information. Please ensure compliance, and then please contact me if you have any further questions.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, it sounds to me like it would be difficult for most people to know if there was a violation actually happening in front of their eyes, but it also sounds to me like your response is relatively soft and informative. So I guess I'm just trying to avoid a situation where, you know, we have to somehow arbitrate between neighbors over this. And so that it really is sort of more of a, how does this play out in real life question? Mm-hmm. And we do have such a small town, and I would hate to, I don't know, you know, mm-hmm. see it turn into something negative, but I mean, obviously the goals are worthy. So that's all I have for today.
Thank you. Thank you. So we will now turn to our residents to ask questions. And Matt, I think you've been keeping track of who's raised their hand. Or...
Yep. First up, we have Julie Greenberg. So Julie, I will turn it over to you.
And remember to say your name.
Julie Greenberg, Fallstone Avenue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. So I had a comment and a question. The comment is that I don't think people in Somerset, I'm certainly not a person in Somerset interested in reporting on neighbors, but I also don't think we need a special Somerset pesticide privilege that exempts us from individual sanctions if we are knowingly violating this law. So I just wanted to make that comment that, you know, I think people in this town have values. I've said that before, and one of the values is following the law. My question is regarding the implementation. When issues of implementation have come up through these last few minutes, they tend to focus on the implementation of the sanctions and the education relating to sanctions. I'd like to know how citizens are feeling. Are they happy with the way their lawns look after they have switched to an organic approach and left aside what they used to achieve, the cosmetic appearance they used to achieve with synthetic pesticides? And I know that, you know, you haven't done a comprehensive survey and all, but I think people want that reassurance that this can be done, that this is not, you know, a huge sacrifice that they may be willing to make on behalf of, you know, health and concerns about the environment. But can you say something, Mary, about are people okay with this when they start making the switch?
You know, I think there's probably different answers depending who you ask that question of, including people on this call and people not on this call. And included in much of the testimony that was out there when this law was put in place, there's hundreds and hundreds of pages of testimony, including from landscapers and residents about having success and being happy with their lawns without the use of these products. I think some people would answer that question differently, and each answer is right, because to each property is different, each lawn is different, and what they've actually done to change can be different. So if you had a chemically dependent lawn and you just remove the chemicals from there and don't do anything else, you know, you can't expect the same results. So I think that, again, there's no really straightforward answer to your question. I think some people would say yes and some people would say no. And then you have to dive deeper into what did they do and how did they do it.
You want to chime in for a second?
Why don't we let each of the presenters respond to that?
All right, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to point out, you know, I used to own my own lawn care company prior to working here at MALP, and my observation is that how your lawn looks is completely subjective. I've been to places, had customers whose lawns really, I thought I was going to be fired, and they were perfectly happy with me. And I've also had folks that have lawns that are better than golf courses and screaming bloody murder because there's a single dandelion out in the middle of the lawn. So, you know, it runs the gambit. And I think that, you know, what really it comes down to, in my estimation, is that, you know, there's a demand for these types of services. There's a demand for, you know, how the lawn looks, and it's going to be different from one place to the next. And what winds up happening when you arbitrarily impose a restriction like this is that it doesn't make the demand go away. It just pushes it off into a black market. And I use the example of what happened in Ontario a number of years ago when they did something very similar province-wide. Is that, you know, what was observed was just over the border in Buffalo, New York, the large box stores like Home Depot and Lowe's and that type of thing, all of a sudden noticed that there was a very large uptick in the amount of lawn and garden supplies that were being sold. And when they went and looked at the sales data, they noticed that you know, the zip codes were from Ontario. So what people were doing was you know, going over the border into the United States, getting the, you know, the weed and tea products that they wanted for their lawns, crossing back over the border. Of course, the border patrol didn't care because it's a national border, but this is a provincial law. So and then they were just continuing to do what they were doing in the past, except the professionals were taken out of the mix. And I spent a lot of time, you know, it's not the only place in the United States that that is looking at these types of ordinances, but I spent a lot of time up in Ontario talking to lawn care providers as to, you know, what their experiences are. And, you know, they found that it was just very, very difficult to provide a service that people would purchase and be satisfied with without having the ability to, you know, turn to a synthetic pesticide when necessary to solve a particular problem. You know, that's the other thing is that, you know, the problems don't go away. And, you know, the products that are available, the 25B products, the OMRI products, you know, they say that they work, but, you know, the efficacy just is not there. And and we're more than happy to look at situations where, you know, we're trying to reduce the amount of pesticides that are used, or use better practices, or, you know, seeding and aerification, that type of thing. But, you know, just coming out and just banning everything altogether is, you know, in my estimation, is just overkill.
If I could jump in, Mr. Mayor, I was thinking about Councilmember Peel's question. I thought it was very thoughtful, because I think none of us as elected officials want to pass laws. We rarely expect complete consensus on any significant law that gets passed. But at the same time, none of us want to pass something that's going to be going to sow a lot of division among our constituents and have, as you mentioned, like neighbors complaining about other neighbors, if it can be avoided. I mean, we all know in this business, you know, change can be upsetting to people, but getting more information about alternatives that are out there and alternative practices rarely is. And I can tell you in the long hearings we had on this bill and the multiple the two I mentioned, but the multiple work sessions in the committee, we all learned a lot about lawn care, more than I think we ever expected to. And we learned from the successful companies that don't use the pesticides about you know, trimming lawns a little bit longer, about, you know, aeration and overseeding, about use of various organic or non-toxic fertilizers that are permitted under fertilizers. And then obviously we put lots of thought into the exceptions, like for invasive species. And we heard lots about, you know, individual hard to manage cases, and we wrote exceptions in for that. So a lot of thought went into it. That's one reason it took a year to pass. And residents learned a lot about, you know, compost and compost tea and many things that they hadn't been using that many people are now using. But I can't speak for the rest of the county, but I just texted my chief of staff to verify my my impression on this. I have, you know, 200,000 constituents or so, and none of them are shy. It's you know, I represent Silver Spring and Tacoma Park and all the way up to East County, and there's a lot of opinions. But we don't get any, since we passed the law and since it's been implemented, we're not getting any complaints from constituents, if that's any reassurance. We do get some complaints from lawn care companies who are now learning how to change their practice, but we really don't get any concerns from constituents now a year after the court decision. So I hope that's a little bit of comforting reassurance.
Okay, thank you. Matt, can you call on the next person?
Yes, Kathy Picard had raised her hand. So Kathy, take it away.
That is former council member Kathy Picard, may I add?
I just want to add that after I had when I had my children born, I stopped using any kind of chemicals on my lawn, and I just let it go because they were always playing soccer or something on it. But about 15 years ago, I started following the county guidelines as well as the lawn care in Paul Tukey's book. And what I found was, and it was very simple, I just aerate in the fall, I aerate in the fall, put down mulch. I buy a lot of leaf grow, so maybe I'll start using my own leaves, and then overseed. And it was very simple. And it took about 3 years, and I started getting a pretty lush lawn. I like a lush lawn, and when it gets a little weedy, I'm one who will just dig it up, but even with a shovel and replant. So I get a little obsessive about it. But it was very simple to do, and I don't have a lawn care company. The kid that mows my grass does it for me. He has an aerator. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's not a big deal, and I love a nice lawn. I really do. I have used corn gluten, and I will look into that and make sure that that's going to be allowed. I thought corn gluten was, an organic alternative for broadleaves, but I'll look up that on my own and look on the county site and see if there is a label that we need to look for on products. I would like to know. I would certainly like to know that. Anyway, that's it. That's my comment.
Okay, Matt, next.
Next is Barton Rubenstein.
Hi everyone. Bart Rubenstein, neighbor. I'm on the environment.
Dorset Avenue.
Dorset Avenue.
Read that for the record.
I really greatly appreciate everyone's focus on this issue. I have a question. I have 3 questions, one for Mary, one for Andrew Bray, and one for just the general council members. So they're not in any particular order. I guess I'll just ask Mary first. A little detailed question. First of all, is I know that the pesticides that are now going on the lawns, they say that once it's dry, it's no longer dangerous for kids to walk on, or maybe it is. My follow-up to that question is, what happens when it rains again? Does that reactivate that same chemical? Is that chemical still alive, or is it dead forever? And if it's still alive, what happens when we have a rainstorm and water rushes from one property to the other? Does that pesticide move from one property to the other? And then a lot more general question for Mary is, what is your perspective about these pesticide laws in our county versus like the rest of the nation? Where are we in the spectrum of pesticide awareness and enforcement?
So that's a great question. And in terms of the first question about pesticides and their drying and use, everything is variable depending on the pesticide. And I think you're speaking specifically of one pesticide, which is iron-based. And what is known about those iron-based products is once they're dry, that they have translocated directly into the plant. Many, but not all of the herbicides. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of other pesticides this law covers, which is insecticides and fungicides and so forth. They're all different in their chemical modalities and how they work. So all of them are going to have labels in terms of when they can be applied, how long before rain, after rain, humidity, wind speed, things of that nature. Some of them, their half-lives might be different. So in terms of how long they last in the soil, washing off. So whether it's a synthetic pesticide or whether it's a listed organic pesticide, including some of them are actually synthesized, they're all going to be variable. So I can't give you a straightforward answer to that for any pesticide. All of them have different risks associated with them. In terms of the law, Montgomery County is the first major municipality in the United States to have a law of this scale. So we are really, we're really the pincushion that everyone's going to be using as a test case. As I understand it, there are other municipalities in the state of Maryland that are looking into adopting the law, either similar or almost exact version of the law. It is very similar to the laws that are across most of Canada in terms of how it's used. There are some small municipalities that have pesticide laws that are similar to this. The city of South Portland, Maine, for example, is almost exact law. There's some municipalities in Massachusetts. As mentioned, Tacoma Park has its own law as well. So there are some small municipalities that have it, but we're the first major municipality to pass this.
Thanks. Question for Andrew. I guess with all the evidence that shows the danger of pesticides, we have had the Monsanto Roundup, very large lawsuit. So I think it's pretty obvious that we have dangers, but at the same time, we want to somehow find a balance to be able to use pesticides to some degree. I mean, I have a holly bush that has this invasive thing on it right now, and I don't want to lose the whole thing. So I understand that we have to find some balance. But my question to you is, how has, with this lawsuit, the Monsanto thing, how has your association and your members, how have you adjusted your own internal policies so that your employees are safer? And what things have you changed so that they are handling safer products? Because obviously, these are the guys in the front lines, like the people at the gas stations pumping fuel. They're the ones that are smelling gasoline, and that's the reason why they put the thing around the thing. They're the ones that are breathing the VOCs from the leaf blowers and the mowers. So I'm actually curious. It seemed to me it would be most beneficial from your perspective that you find safer ways to protect your own members.
Sure, and thank you for the question. We have members that don't use pesticides. We have members that decide to use pesticides. We don't differentiate. But the fact for us is that we have to rely on the statutory scheme offered by FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, okay? And then EPA registers pesticides. They go through a tremendous amount of resources to bring a pesticide to market. And specifically with regards to safety to children, they actually go through a 10-fold X magnifier to make sure they're not adversely impacting children. I'm not going to get into details on the Monsanto trial because there's a lot of question about what's really going on there. Is it really about a failure to warn, or is it really about a dangerous pesticide? I'd be the first to tell you that if you use a product wrongly, it can be dangerous. I have small children in my house, and we make sure that other products that are approved that could easily be dangerous, like bleach or something, are locked up. But the point of pesticides is they go through this robust process at the federal level. They then must be approved by the state. So in Maryland, the State Department of Agriculture approves these products. And then to even use a product by a professional certified applicator, they go through this process of being certified. So for us, what we are teaching our members is to make sure they understand the label, they understand the proper use of pesticides, and they practice integrated pest management, which means you don't always start out with using a pesticide. You explore other options to fix the situation. But there, in many instances, come times when a pesticide may be used. And that's what we have been trying to emphasize with Montgomery County is there a way we can work with you? Is there a way to increase education? Would you like more stewardship from our industry? And it's just been unfortunate because we feel very singled out because pesticides are still going to be used on lawns for various reasons. Pesticides are still going to be used around houses. They're going to still be used on agricultural. They're going to still be used on the playing fields in Montgomery County. But for some reason, we feel the lawn care industry was really, really targeted here. And we just don't believe that the data actually backs that up. We have to trust our federal regulators and our state regulators. I can tell you that the people that we're working with at EPA are the same people that were there, some of the people in first Bush's administration, then Clinton, then second Bush, then Obama now. So a lot of these decisions some people think may be political, but that's not really the way it works. And it's unfortunate because we as an industry are committed to using safe products. So thank you for the time. I probably ran a little bit over. I am going to have to run, but Bob May and my colleague will stay on the call. So thank you, Barton.
Okay. Okay, Barton, before you go on, I just want to do a time check. Councilmember Hucker, are you able to stay on or?
Mr. Mayor, I got to take this call at 1, so I
Okay, well,
apologize.
thank you. We will, if there are any further questions, we will have them directed to your office.
Please do, and you know how to reach me. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm happy to get back to anybody with any additional information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mr.
So I
Mayor, are
take
you
it-
going to stop this at 1? I think we'd scheduled at 12 to 1 today.
No, we didn't. No, we are going to keep going as long as our presenters are available. So, Barton, continue your questions.
This is sort of more of an open-ended question to the town council members. I know that there's concern about compliance and keeping the town sort of civil, and that there's a balance to that, and I appreciate concern of that. And I also feel like I'm just sort of, the county has gone through a tremendous lengthy process of studies and appeal process, and it seems like, we're a part of Montgomery County, and we all sort of share similar values as far as, I guess the county has spoken what it wants to do. So we are a part of it now, as Tom mentioned. And I just sort of was concerned to hear that, we're trying to find ways where we can adopt this pesticide law, but find ways that we don't have to be compliant of it. It seemed like we're trying to sort of massage our way into an opportunity where we can sort of be halfway there, but not there. So I'm just sort of, it sort of lends itself to the idea that, that maybe Montgomery County really does not know what it's doing. And, we're going to keep them at a distance with our 10-foot pole, and measure in our own ideas against that. So I'm just a little bit concerned about why there's such an interest of sort of compliance and, yeah.
Can I respond, since I raised a lot of those questions? Others may also want to, but I just wanted to reassure Barton that from my point of view, I'm just trying to understand where the responsibility is. I'm not saying that the county doesn't know what it's doing or that we don't want anything to do with it. I've had conversations with Ron in the past about how the municipal ordinances, how our structure works, whether we adopt something that's a county law or whether we adopt our own law. And I was trying to understand how those two different approaches would play out in terms of the role of the council and the town government going forward. Because I think it is worth talking it through, and maybe this setting is, maybe it's not interesting to other people, but it's interesting to me because, right now we have 2 people in the office, and if what we're talking about are situations where residents are, based on their observation, thinking that there's a problem, and then picking up the phone, it's more likely than not that they're going to call Matt. They're not going to call 311. They're going to call Matt. And so, or Linda. And then I want to know what Matt and Linda are supposed to do with that. And I think we just need to know what the expectation is for our town employees, and we need to have a plan in place for how they're supposed to manage that. And the other side of my question was, if somebody reports something and then we inform them that they're supposed to call the county, and the county then essentially chooses not to enforce the law that they have, where they have a fine built into a violation. If they're choosing not to enforce that, I was trying to understand whether the town government would then be exposed to any kind of enforcement liability if we don't enforce it. So, that, like I said, not everybody's interested in those questions, but that doesn't suggest that I'm saying that the law's not worthwhile. It's just that I'm trying to figure out where Town of Somerset would fit into the enforcement pattern, especially when I hear from Mary and from Councilmember Hucker that enforcement is not their first priority. So that, I just wanted to make sure you understand that that's what I'm talking about. Does enforcement shift to the Town of Somerset if the county is not making it a top line priority?
Right. And if I can correct, I don't think we mean that it's not a top priority. Our first priority is education. We want people to comply with laws because they understand how it protects the residents, the environment, wildlife, pets, children, etc. We want to get people on board with understanding it just with as well as all of our other environmental laws that are out there.
That's fine.
Okay, Bart, do you have any other questions?
Nope, thank you.
Okay,
I wanted
thank
to
you.
say something, Jeffrey, on this.
Oh, I'm
this
sorry,
issue.
I'm sorry.
I just, this is a broader comment than about this particular issue, but one of the reasons municipalities are special, and Ron can always speak more to this than I can, but we have the option for opting into county laws that we want to opt into, or in some cases, we have stricter laws than the county. For example, I think on set-asides and so on. So municipalities do have special powers, and within the overall framework, we do have options for what we choose to do.
Okay, thank you. Matt, who's next?
Wait a second, can I just weigh in for a moment?
Oh, sure, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think part of what Barton is getting to is what is the threat or the issue? And I just like to postulate that this is established science here, that these synthetic pesticides are hazardous. They need to be handled by trained professionals for certain applications. And the county, after a rigorous review of the situation, has determined that for certain applications, it's just not safe, period, for use, with minor exceptions. But in terms of general use, it shouldn't be done.
Right. I mean, I don't know if I was clear or not.
This isn't a debate now. This is the opportunity to answer questions. So so thank you.
I completely get what Franny was getting at, and I'm glad she asked that question.
Okay, thank you.
I was referring more to Barton and Andy and Bob.
This is a hearing, and now we're taking questions. So did anybody else care to respond to Barton's question? Okay, thank you. We will now, Matt, please call on the next person.
Sure. Robin Barr had raised his hand.
Yep, I'm Robin Barr, Essex Avenue, and I'm also chair of the Environment Committee, and the Environment Committee was the committee that recommended that the town opt into the county pesticide law as amended. We heard from one of the NALP professionals that according to him, there is a rigorous and thorough federal review of pesticides. And following that, if it passes the federal review, there is then a thorough state review. And so the question is, surely there is no local need then for a local law. The question, fine, I got a comment before, but the bottom line question is, Mary, surely the county knew that, so why did the county do what it did? But some background, Kumar Vaswani, who is a resident of Somerset, sent to the council and to Steve Serco and myself before the council his own summary of two reports, one by the National Resources Defense Council and one by the Center for Biological Diversity. And they both point to serious holes in the federal process for review of pesticides. And that in fact, the majority of pesticides come through the federal process on a conditional registration, where there hasn't been a thorough scientific examination of the pesticide. So it isn't the smooth process that was described to us. That's the background I know, but I do want to hear how Montgomery County saw it, and that's why I'm asking Mary to go over what Montgomery County did, knowing the federal and state process.
There we go. Sorry about that. So Robin, I was not a part of the process at the time to go through it all, but there are hundreds of pages of testimony and documentation, including references to the things that you just mentioned that Kumar shared. So we're happy to share that with you. I did share it with the council. They could send it along to you. It's all public documentation. It's all out there. And what the county ultimately determined was that federal and state law did not properly protect the citizens and the environment of Montgomery County. And therefore, these additional provisions were added into the pesticide law. And again, I can't really go into all the details on it, but there's a lot of information there that you can dive back into.
Okay, Robin, does that answer your question?
That's my question answered. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Matt, next person.
Yep, we have one last person that requested to ask a question, so I'm going to turn it over to Ralph Wooden.
Hi, I'm Ralph Wooden, River Road, although I'm closer to Trent Street. My yard, if anybody were to see it, especially the lawn care people, would probably think it's a disaster. However, my lawn probably has maybe a dozen different plants and any number of butterflies, bees, birds, which would all be killed if I were to put pesticides on my lawn. A few days ago, I was walking my dog and I saw a neighbor, a yard care company, spraying. And it sounded, I thought he was actually using a leaf blower because it kept vroom, vroom, vroom. But when I looked, I could see from my yard, I could see every time he pressed the button, a spray coming out. I could see the spray from my yard. And immediately I took my dog to, and I could smell it too. I took my dog to another part. You know, we stayed away from there for a couple of days. I am proud of Montgomery County, that Montgomery County has taken this action to limit pesticides. And I would hate for the town of Somerset, Tree City and all that, to be less, to show less care than the county itself. I certainly hope we would not turn down any legislation that would at least get us up to the level of Montgomery County. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ralph. I think, Matt, isn't there one more question? And then we'll ask the council if they have any final questions.
Yes, Kathy Pickar had raised her hand.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to add, this is not a question, but I just want to add to that what I've observed over the years that I've been following this process. I know when we had chemicals on the lawn, maybe I wasn't thinking that, or we didn't have earthworms. And what has happened in the past few years without using any chemicals is that our garden beds, my lawn, everything is just, you dig into it, which I do all the time. Those of you that know see me out in the yard, it's full of earthworms. And that in itself is providing, those of you who are not gardeners, that in itself is providing natural aeration, and it's providing fertilizer from the worm casings. So that's kind of cool to see. But pesticides will kill those earthworms. And I've also noticed that when people use pesticides and we come into a drought or something like that, or if a family who's used it, and I know one house in particular, and I just laughed, used pesticides to keep their grass green. The family that moved in did not. The lawn just died. And it was very hard to recover it. So it's sort of artificial when you use these pesticides. You don't get a really healthy lawn like I feel that we have now. Second thing was, and this was years and years and years ago, one of my neighbors had a baby that was having difficulties, and she saw the truck coming to another neighbor's property to spray, and she took that baby and ran, and she wouldn't come back for a couple of days. That was pretty serious. She was frightened that it would have some kind of effect on her child's breathing. So just want to throw that out there too. And she has been quite active in this, but I won't mention any names. Anyway,
Okay,
that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we conclude this public hearing, do any council members have a final question or comment? Okay,
Mary,
well,
Jeffrey?
go for it. Go for it.
So Mary, I'm kind of worried because I have, and this is related to a comment Barton made. I have a dogwood tree that's been struggling, and so Bartlett comes by and sprays it. And I know that that's permitted under the law, but they put up a yellow sign. That's the same yellow sign that people put when the lawns are treated. I'm a little worried as a council member that somebody would like say, look, I'm reporting her. So how do you guys go about distinguishing between permitted uses and non-permitted uses when the sign is the same sign?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the sign has to be the same sign that the state regulates. It is completely optional for a landscaper to put an additional sign up if they would like. They can also write whatever they want on the back of the sign. When we get those little yellow sign reports, again, I think somebody mentioned that the concern is how do we distinguish if it was a legal application or not. That's where we approach them and say, we had a report of a sign put out. We don't know whether it was legal or not. Here's education about the law. We're expecting you to be compliant. Please, be compliant to help protect the citizens of the county. We also suggest for the lawn treatments, I realize your tree treatment is exempt, but if it's a treatment to the lawn that was for a lawn pest, we do suggest to them to do something like write the word organic on the back so that it's easily identifiable. If someone says, oh, I saw a little yellow sign, we can say, could you let us know what it says on the back of that sign to help out with that? But when it's an exemption, again, they might have to apply something in the lawn area to treat the tree, and they do have to use that sign. We don't assume that it's illegal, sorry. It's a challenge. I'll admit it. It's a challenge, but we're, again, trying to assume that if they're putting the sign up, they understand the law and they're doing the right thing, and we'll contact them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Is that it, Madam President? Okay, thank you. Are there any other council member have a question? Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone, especially our presenters, Mary, Bob, Councilmember Hucker, for this highly informative hearing. And we will pass on whatever information you want to provide in the future. And I look forward to seeing many of you on Monday night at our next council meeting. Thank you.
Sounds
Take
good.
care.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.